Greens are threatening to block Labor's Help to Buy housing scheme unless there are significant changes to negative gearing. Speaking on Sky News, the Treasurer Jim Chalmers said the government had no plans to change negative gearing, but the Greens are set to use their power in the Senate to pressure Labor to reduce negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts in exchange for their support. Well, joining me live now is Greens MP Max Chandler-Mather. Max, thanks so much for your time. First of all, we all know that Labor said that there would be no changes to stage 3 tax cuts either. So do you think that they're wavering on negative gearing too?
Well, they should be, and we know that the Prime Minister said in his own words, when economic circumstances change, well, so should government policy. Well, we're in the worst housing crisis we've faced in generations with skyrocketing house prices and rents, and all the government are offering is a policy that will make the situation worse. 0.2% of renters will be able to access this scheme every year. For the other 99.8% of renters, this will drive up house prices. And so changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions, what they'll do is free up billions of dollars in government revenue and give first home buyers who regularly get beaten out by a property investor at auctions a chance to actually buy their own home. And then we'll be able to use that extra revenue to invest in public housing the way governments used to in Australia in the 20th century. If we are going to fix the housing crisis, we have to address negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions.
OK, but not all of it can be done by government. Not all homes can be public housing. So what would changing negative gearing do to the supply in the market?
Well, actually what we know is over 90% of all property investor purchases are on existing dwellings. That means they're not actually adding to supply. What they're doing is hoarding homes that could have been used by a first home buyer. I'm sure there are a lot of parents out there who right now are worried about their kids and whether or not they'll be able to buy a home. And one of the reasons they're struggling is because the government dishes out billions of dollars in tax handouts to people with multiple properties, 10 or 20 properties. And what that does is drive up house prices and allow them to beat out renters and first home buyers at auctions. And look, in a country in Australia where we pride ourselves on providing fairness and giving everyone an opportunity, that doesn't really seem fair.
The Treasurer said there are no plans to change negative gearing. I think anyone who follows politics closely or even not so closely would know that that always leaves the door open. So what can you tell us, Max? What's happening behind the scenes? Do you have a sympathetic ear?
Well, look, we know that there are all sorts of people across the political spectrum now pointing out we do need to shift on these big tax handouts for big property investors. Everyone from Dominic Perrottet...
Hang on. Let's talk about what you just said there, big cash handouts for big property investors. Surely you acknowledge that people using this negative gearing, they're not all big investors. They're not necessarily rich as you would declare them, right?
Well, actually, if you look at the government's own documents, the vast lion's share of these tax concessions go to the top 10% of earners. Now, what the Greens policy in 2020 was phasing out these tax concessions for everyone but one investment property. So we're not going to touch the people with one investment property, but we are talking about those people with 5, 10, 20 investment properties.
Which is some. There's a few in that building, aren't there, Max? Anyone in the Greens?
There are, and... Well, that's right, but the big difference is that anyone in the Greens
got multiple negatively geared properties?
Well, yes, there are, but the big difference is they are pushing to phase out those tax concessions. The problem we have is we have a property investor, Prime Minister, who is refusing to phase out billions of dollars in tax concessions for property investors that are denying millions of renters the chance of ever buying a home. That's the big problem. And I think people in civil society are always really frustrated with the hypocrisy of politicians. Yes. And I couldn't think of a better example than the fact that the overwhelming majority or a large share of Parliament own property investments, and then you have the two major parties who have most of those property investments are refusing to tax concessions they benefit from.
Max, when you talk about hypocrisy in politics, I mean, you say the difference is that those within the Greens are pushing to have it abolished. If you really believed that negative gearing was so unfair, why wouldn't these Greens MPs or senators sell their negatively geared properties under their own volition? I mean, that's hypocrisy, isn't it?
Well, I think in the same way that I think that politicians' wages shouldn't be as high as they are, there are all sorts of policies, or for instance, that we should phase transition to renewable energy. It's obviously, I think really our job in Parliament is to push to change policy. Sometimes that doesn't mean that people on their own individual behaviour are going to be slightly different.
But that's like saying do as I say, not as I do, right?
Well, no, what we're saying is that we have a chance in Parliament to phase out those tax concessions for property investors. And you have one group in Parliament who will vote tomorrow to phase out those tax concessions, which is the Greens. And then you have the Labor and Liberal Party who will seem to be willing to fight tooth and nail to refuse to phase out those tax concessions that will cost, by the way, overall, the federal budget over the next 10 years, $500 billion, which imagine what we could spend that on: building public housing, dental into Medicare. I think the bottom line here should be, why is it that the two major parties who have a lot of property investors are refusing to touch those tax concessions? And I think that really is the big question.
All right, look, we need property investors and we need property developers as well to solve this housing crisis. What I did want to get you on today, and I've kind of been a little bit sidetracked, is this right to disconnect laws. Max, no one in the last week, including the Greens, has given me, or I haven't seen a good example as to why this new regulation was required. Do you have a good example?
Well, I think there are lots of instances where workers are compelled to reply to emails or texts outside of their paid work hours when those messages or replies.
If it takes 10 seconds or less than a minute, I mean, why is it onerous?
Well, it is onerous because it forces you to think about work again, think about a reply. It sticks with you. And we know that causes undue stress. I mean, in practical terms, if you're trying to enjoy your kid's footy match or you're trying to sit around the family lunch table and you're trying to have a nice conversation and forget about the stresses of work, and all of a sudden on your phone pops up an email from your boss and they're demanding a reply straight away, I think we all recognise that causes a lot of stress and that has implications beyond you immediately replying to that message. And I would say, just on this, that would improve productivity. I saw that, the Liberals are going out and saying,
every expert disagrees that would improve productivity, because the quid pro quo here is, Max, employers have given a lot of flexibility to employees, particularly over the last couple of years. Wouldn't they be less inclined to give that flexibility now?
Well, no. First of all, that's not true. Workers are working longer and longer hours, often for less pay.
And they're demanding from home.
Well, yes, but we know that decreases productivity because every study has shown, and if you look at for instance, the trials of reducing the working week, that actually every company that has trialled transitioning to, say, a 4-day working week has kept it because it has improved productivity. Because when you're happier
so much flexibility
and more
in
relaxed,
there.
you do more work.
Yeah, and the studies show that 4 days a week, because there was flexibility for people, more flexibility for people, and if they work 4 days a week, they're more inclined to answer the odd email or text message out of hours. Wouldn't you agree?
I think what you describe as flexibility for a lot of people is experiences stress, anxiety, and inability to relax or switch off.
Who is getting stressed over a single text message?
We have seen big increases in mental health problems around overwork.
Sure, but I'm asking for that one example of what industry this is a problem in. And I just...
all sorts of industries that rely, for instance, a lot of white-collar jobs, for instance, would have situations where a boss gets in touch. Yes, where a boss gets in touch with an email or a text that could wait until the weekend. Let me put it to you this way. I think that workers should only have to work the hours that they're paid for. I don't think that's a radical proposition. And I would say it's brave of the opposition leader and Peter Dutton to have his possession at the next election saying, I'd prefer you to be responding to your boss's text.
But that's not what he's saying, though,
Max. Rather than focusing on your child's footy match.
Hang on, that's not what he's saying. That's not what he's saying. And what I worry about here, and thank you for having this conversation with me, because it needs to be had. What bothers me here is that there's a real, it's couched in a lack of ambition, that you work that little bit extra to get ahead, and somehow we're regulating that out.
Look, I don't want to get all philosophical on Sky,
Oh,
but
please
surely
do.
the point when we all only have one chance on this earth to live a good life, I would argue that we should pursue a set of policies that give us the maximum chance to enjoy time with our kids,
Sure.
to enjoy times with our family and friends, and be able to properly switch off. All this is doing, by the way, is saying that in instances where bosses get in touch with you, say, and demand a response over the weekend when you're not being paid, when you're trying to switch off, that you then have a reasonable conversation with your employer about that and try to set some parameters. It's about driving cultural change. We're framing this as if the sky is going to fall in. And I think it shows, by the way, how far this debate has shifted in some parts of the media, if I may, and amongst the opposition. All of a sudden, is it being framed radical that on the weekend you should get the time to enjoy that with your family and friends? And I disagree with the Liberals that time should be
I'm just saying it doesn't take that long and it shouldn't be that stressful to maybe reply to the odd text message.
Well, look, the bottom line for us, and certainly the Greens, and why we pushed for this, and this was the Greens' big win, was I disagree with Peter Dutton. I think people should be getting a chance to hang out with their families or go to their kids' footy game rather than respond to a text from their boss that could wait until Monday. I mean, and if he wants to go to the election on that position, so be it. I think it will prove rather unpopular. And I do remember the Liberals previously talking about, the government ruining people's weekends or claiming the weekend. I tell you what does ruin your weekend, a stressful text from your boss that you have to respond to that takes you away from that family lunch or takes you away from your kid's footy match. And I think that's pretty stressful. And I think a lot of Australians would agree that weekends and your time off when you're not being paid, that's time for relaxation and enjoying life, the things that actually makes life meaningful, and not responding to messages and texts that often absolutely could wait till Monday or your next paid working day.
Yeah, look, I don't think that stress is a lived experience, but we'll see. As you say, a debate at the next election. Max, we really appreciate your time.